Entrepreneurship
on 702.
Andisa Ramavhunga is Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. He joins me now here in studio. Please, by the way, join us in this conversation. Call in right now, 011-883-0702. What challenges have you had with regards to funding for your business? Whom have you been speaking to? What have you been saying? What has the response been from those that you want to get your funding from? Andisa, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I've had lots of people saying, hey, and where is that guy? And, to tell them that the flu bug had come in your way like it has messed everybody up. But are you well?
I'm well, Aubrey. You know, at some point in time, I thought I was immune. But I've just realized that I'm as mortal as the next man. So I'm humbled. I'm grateful to be here. I suppose entrepreneurs at some level need to play around with the idea that they might be supermen, be immortal. And the flu bug, as small as it is able to humble us all. Humbling indeed. Yeah.
Funding is always a big issue when talking entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And very often when somebody says, I don't need coaching, I don't need a long discussion about the principles and the ethics and the mindsets of business. I want 5 million rands now for my business.
Yeah.
We often say that person is being a little bit too presumptuous. At which point does a entrepreneur need to start thinking about funding?
Okay, Aubrey, my simple answer to that is day one.
Yeah.
But I think let's foreground it, because I also don't want us, or at least I don't want people to accuse us of being disingenuous.
Yep.
Remember when we started speaking about value creation and strategy, we said the money is not in institution, but it's in your business, it's in your market, right? Which I think rings true. I made a statement that whatever funding you are going to get, it's a bridge between you starting up the business up until you are able to access your market and you are able to sell, and that market is able to grow and you are able to make a surplus, right? But let's unpack fundamentally why a business needs funding, and I'll come back and link it back to the value creation story. In fact, before maybe we come back and talk value creation, let's come back and talk about why would a business fundamentally require funding. Let's talk a bit about value creation. And we said value creation is simply two things, right? It's driving a wedge between your revenues and your costs. That is the surplus and the profit we talk about. If you are not about realizing profit, you are not creating value. And let me tell you, if your idea or your business has no realistic chance or no sellable chance of turning a profit, there is no way that it's going to attract any type of
it's got to be
funding.
viable.
It's got to be viable.
Yeah.
And hence this issue of value creation. And simplistically, when I said the value or the money of your business, it's in the market. It's up that alley of that revenue line, right? When you take your product, it's got a price, you multiply it by how many customers are willing to pay for it. The higher that number, the highest, obviously, it goes. And you spoke at length about some of the levers strategically that are available for you to impact on that top line. We came back as well and spoke the cost line when we spoke financial statements. And I'll keep on referring to this, and maybe this is again an opportunity to reflect on some of the concepts that we've spoken about, you and I. So simplistically, profit is revenue minus cost, and we went on to deliberate on what are the various types of costs. But let's keep it simple and say how you create value is how far you can drive a wedge between your revenues and your costs. And that's typically what value creation is about. But before you can create that value, there's two things that you actually typically you'll find you need for you to create that value. It's assets and the money to work the assets. Was typically called working capital. And if you remember from our balance sheet conversation, and I'm sorry to go back there, but for those listeners who are listening and have missed that podcast, I'd like to throw you back, because I thought we explained the balance sheet in layman's term. Your assets, there's only two ways to fund them. It's either you fund them yourself, or you go borrow something called, by the way, owner's equity, or the equity line in the business.
Your skin in
Your
the
skin
business.
in the business. Yeah. Or you go borrow money. And again, I say skin in the business, but there's various ways of raising funding using that equity. But that's why it's quite important to use a framework of characterizing challenges and growth patterns of business as it evolves. And a lot of academics have written about this. My favorite paper was written out of Harvard. I know there's someone at some point says, hey, you're plagiarizing stuff. I can tell you there's a wonderful paper. It was written, by the way, in 1983. I revisited it again in preparation for this show. But I summed it up to say that there's 4 phases of a business. And those 4 phases of a business have got very different implications in terms of the assets that you need, as well as the owner's equity, the working capital that you need. The 4 stages, there's 4 of them. So there's a startup phase where there's nothing, there's just the owner, and you have some rough idea of what you want to do. You've identified some need in the market. You've found maybe some customers for those lucky enough to get a contract in the mine to supply coal, and therefore they need a truck. You typically find it's a very simple business. It's funded, it's run by the owner and maybe some small employees, but it's requiring some startup funding. That funding is either
to buy that truck,
to pay the driver.
Right.
So the asset part would be the truck, obviously, and the trailer that it needs, and the working capital would be the diesel that the oil,
the salaries
of the drivers, and so typically you'd find in a startup that it's the owner themselves that fund that working capital, and the owner themselves, if they have got the money, they buy the asset. But you get other types of funders who can come in there. This is where it gets interesting, Aubrey, but I'll try simplify it. So you get what you call family friends, and sometimes they call them fools.
Yeah.
So you can go get, so those are people who are willing to just close their eyes and give you the money because we are family or because they've got a good heart for you. But there's very minimal risk that they are exposing. But they could typically be investors, by the way, angel investors that come in very early in that business. And you need to understand that those guys are coming in to invest in the business, the way of raising the business. So they would not typically be debt lenders, but they'll be equity in investors. And I'll come back to say what are the risks and rewards once I've painted out the entire line. So you get a business that's in startup phase, requires very different. In fact, I call that funding that they require startup funding.
Right.
But typically, it all addresses the same needs, right? It's either you're buying assets that are using to produce your revenues.
And imagine it is really dependent on the nature of that business.
Yeah, so there's, in technology, for example, it could be developing, getting software to develop software, by the way, getting some coders to help you develop, you need to buy certain licenses, you need to buy certain servers.
Right.
If it's a restaurant, it's obviously you need a venue to sell food, or if you're buying a caravan, you need a caravan you need the ingredients, by the way, you need the stoves, you need the cooking oil and the stuff. So the principles are the same, no matter what, a business you're getting in. I guess what you're asking is where is the balance between capital vis-a-vis working capital, right?
Right.
CapEx vis-a-vis.
Right.
Obviously, it will slant based on the type of business that you are going into. So there's typically the startup funding that's required. Then you move in what we call the growth phase. The growth phase, that's when you and I spoke about the concept of scaling, right? Because growth phase is about, okay, I've moved on from being a startup. I now have at least one client, and my role now is to get more clients, is to move into other jurisdiction, is to get another truck, is to get another driver, and so forth. Then you realize that both from a CapEx point of view, the complexity increases, as well as from the human resource point of view. You're getting more people now, you're pouring more petrol in more trucks, buying more ingredients, right? So I call that scaling because from a startup phase, you can manage that thing in a bit of a spreadsheet, right? In a growing phase, you can't do that because the complexity gets. So you need to invest in these other things that I call them the enablers of growth, those things that are going to sustain the growth. So you need to have a bit of systems. You need to have a bit of formal processes, hiring processes, for example. You need to have quite a lot of, I would call, structure within the business, because the complexity is just so over beyond just your capex. So your capex line moves beyond just getting, for example, a truck, additional truck. Now it means let me get that ERP software so that I can load people in there. It can load my material and all those things. So again, that's growth funding. That's required. And typically...
So we've spoken of startup funding.
Yeah.
Growth funding.
Funding, yeah. And again, it's, I'm simplifying, it's really what it is. It's capex. It's, working capital. Working capital in the sense, if now you're moving into a scaling phase, there are those administrative, what I call infrastructure that you need to build. Things like ERP software, things like you need now an IT administrator, things like you need to buy licenses for more computers and so forth.
So in other words, it's things that are not necessarily core to the business,
but are required.
They're required by the growing business.
Yeah. Think about it this way. If you're a restaurant here, and you were running one shop, now you need to run, let's say 5 shops or 10 shops.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you can't have the office based in that one shop. You need to find now new premises.
Right.
Where you have all your finance people, all your marketing people who are managing with the franchise. So I guess you get the gist, right? Yeah. It's not, you're not selling food directly, but you are enabling the selling of food.
Right.
But that, by the way, requires investments as well, and that's what we typically call growth funding. But just for simplicity, I'd like to belabor the point that you're still funding either capex or capex, what I call equipment or assets, right? And it could be property, it could be trucks, it could be the list is endless, or it could be working capital, which is about people, it's about salaries, it's about rent for the administrative staff. Stock. Well, stock is part of assets, by the way. It's not working capital. Remember, I referred to the balance sheet and said, you see now, you're also losing me.
Sure.
Because remember, I said there's 2 types of assets. There's long-term assets or fixed assets, or short-term assets.
Right.
Short-term stock will typically be an item in it's reflected as value in a balance sheet.
Right.
Working capital is not necessarily, because quite a big chunk of it form parts of what we call the income statement, but it contributes in generating a profit.
Understood, yeah.
And remember that profit, like we said, it's something that goes back into the balance sheet as owner's equity. So you do need that flow in. But I digress, Aubrey, because I'm trying to also revisit
Let me remind our listeners that please pay particular attention to the various phases at which your business might be at the moment. And then maybe call in to ask about what needs to be done, given the phase at which your business is at now in order to get the funding. So we've established that there is the startup funding that we need to get. Then we've got to think about the scaling funding, or the growth funding.
The growth funding, yes.
All right.
So typical funders there, again, you get what we call venture capitalists. But I think we spoke about the venture capitalist industry in South Africa is not as vibrant as any other parts in the world. But government has come in, I guess, very handy in there to try to close the gap. So I'll use maybe venture capitalist / development funding. I know I don't want financiers to come and say those things are not the same thing, but I think they're trying to implement the same thing, because development financiers will typically want to take a stake in the business, so meaning that they'll convert their equity over time. So it's treated as debt, but it gives you, and I'll come to the risk again without confusing the story. So it gives you a bit of a breather in terms of the obligations that the business might have in its growth phase. But for all intents and purposes, let's say there's a need for VC funding at the growth phase, typically. There's a need for development
VC,
venture capitalists.
Right.
So it's typically like an angel investor, but they're investing in a potential business with a very big potential to grow. And that growth, you need to be able to demonstrate it. That's why we call it growth. So typically they'll come in because you have clients that you are servicing, right? You typically don't have enough cash to grow. That's why you need to get additional cash, but you've got a captured market. You've got a very solid business model. You are clear about who your clients are. You know what it takes to win in the market. And what you are looking for now is just obviously getting enough surplus, because you'll find your profits are not enough to find your growth. That's why you'll then go and borrow cash from other investors or other financiers. But VCs will typically look at that type of a business, and they'll be able to inject cash in it.
Are they lending you the money, or
no? So most of them are equity position.
They're buying.
Holders.
When you say buying,
they're buying shares. So they're buying ownership of your business. We're going in now, and maybe that's an opportune time, Aubrey, because I've been delaying it because I thought I'll come explain it at the end. Really, there's two types of funding, right? Or anything in between. It's either you are getting debt or someone is buying an ownership of your business, and anything in between. You remember I spoke about developmental financiers. They are typically debt lenders, but because they are trying to de-risk your business, and when I say de-risk, a portion of the amount that they lend you does not become immediately due. So that means it gives you a breathing space to have as much cash for growth as possible. So there's typically subdue that in a form of a share ownership. But as and when you are coming out of the cash crunch, you are then able to buy them out, and they're then able to exit. So basically that's in a simple nature the difference between developmental finance and typical VCs is that typical VC development finance they'll do a portion of both, but with a view of exiting eventually. But the venture capitalists will come in, and they'll typically want to go with you.
They want to share in
the value
growth.
In the value that you are creating. Now hence that's why the price for let me say the risk is exactly this. Debt has got immediate obligations, which puts strain on your cash flow. Equity doesn't, because you don't have to pay it, but it's costlier in the long run because it shares in the value that you create.
Right.
I hope that makes
it does. So let me see if I can break it down.
Yeah.
Venture capitalists who would typically want to buy a portion of your business and share in the growth and the prosperity of your business.
Yeah.
Might not or the perception of what they contribute to your business in the early stages may look cheaper. But ultimately, it is the ownership, a portion of the ownership of your business. Yeah. It is more expensive in that sense, right? Whereas, what are the developmental financiers?
Yeah, so the development finance are the blend. In fact, they are debt. Let me just say, they are debt lenders. Just that the instruments they use tend to blend between equity and debt. But even the equity portion is with the view of exiting. It's really to de-risk.
Just really help you.
Yeah, to help you.
Right.
Uplift the business.
Right.
So banks will get involved here, but I want us maybe suspend the. In fact, banks will get right across, right? But maybe let me suspend them, and I'll come to explain why they'll get right across and why you'll typically find that they don't do these first two stages, but they'll do the third stage, right? So we've spoken now about the growth phase.
Yep.
The third phase is now the maturity phase. The maturity phase meaning now that I've grown. I've not stopped growing, but I've shown a profit, a surplus, and I can fund my growth through my own balance sheet or through my own profits that I make in a period, right?
Yeah.
You find that that type of entity has quite a number of people. The owner is probably not as much involved as he or she used to be in the first two phases. Yeah. That's when you typically find very competent managers. It's able to hire very high caliber skilled people. It's becoming somewhat of a corporate, right. But I would like to say it's not quite a corporate. It just reached a stage of maturity where it's becoming cash positive.
Deeper systems.
Stronger
administration.
Yeah, so all those scaling efforts around putting in a recruitment process, putting an HR system, financial management system, those are the results coming to fruition now into a mature business.
Yep.
It's a very good place to be in as an entrepreneur, because this is when you can step out and go on leave and don't come back, but the
business continues to operate.
When they say you are self-employed,
right?
Vis-a-vis
a business owner, yeah.
You've become a business owner now, not really self-employed. Yep. So it's a business, and that's where a business can take two forms or three forms, right? Well, two forms. It's either you are happy as a business and you run and as an owner, you spend your time doing other things. Others run for political office. Others take vacations, or they go spend time in some of their philanthropical or purpose type driven work. And you find a lot of these in family businesses, by the way, if you realize this. Or you can become a very mature business that's got even greater ambitions. This is where now you want to become a corporate. And this is where typically you'll find that, okay, banks will fund these types of business because, and I'll come back to banks so that I can crystallize why but they typically fund those type of business. The cash flows are constant. They're able to prove a record. They've been, reliable or they've been showing results reliably over a period of time. The governance is somewhat transparent. The business has been paying its taxes. It typically has a board of directors. It becomes a very safe bet. That's why banks will go in. But another interesting ways of raising funding there is listing, by the way. That's when you can go into the stock exchange, do a rights issue and raise, if you've got those ambitions to scale it to bigger continents now, to other continents, other countries, run a multinational type business. That's the typical funding you'd get in there. But it's not only that. You can go borrow money now aggressively with the banks, particularly the corporate banks. So this is where every business wants to be. Maybe let me touch base. Oh, by the way, there's also private equity players there who want to come in there, because it's not only listing that raises the fund, but you can find another player with big cash or big balance sheet who typically either want to acquire you or they want to invest in you and grow with you. This is when now we are taking the business to dizzy heights, right? Beyond, this is when your name will be known and you'll probably have paparazzi following you as an entrepreneur. There's this last phase, but I don't want to dwell too much on it. It's called a decline renewal phase. The reason why I want to refer to it is because I do not also want to create an impression that once you've reached there, it's all win and we can all go home and a beautiful story is written. Businesses have got life cycles, and we've seen it with conglomerates, right? The likes of Ford Motors. I think, I'm not sure if they've recently filed for not bankruptcy, but what do they call this?
Business rescue.
Business rescue or something like that. The likes of Mr. Video, if you remember, Kodak, Nokia, at some point with their mobile phone business. So meaning that
SAA.
I mean, I think history is littered with a lot of them to just belabor and prove the point that says no matter how big you grow, right, there will come a time where you are at the renewal phase, and there's a number of reasons for that. There could be competition, by the way, that comes in to eat your lunch, right? You remember that value we spoke about to say increase your revenue, reduce your costs. They're eating on top of that revenue line because they are throwing market share. Right. Changing consumer preferences, right? If you think about DVD and what killed it, it's not so much that people became less interested in entertainment, but they got various or other alternative and much more easier and cheaper ways of affording that entertainment. And you think Netflix versus Mr. Video is a typical story of those technology leap type companies. So there is such a thing, and entrepreneurs, no matter how we spoke about flu when we came in, right? No matter how invincible you think you are, just plan. And by the way, as part of your strategy, it helps you just manage that transition. And by the way, there are other funders who come in that stage, right? Right. If you remember, there's a movie, I'd not like to say, my wife is listening, a Pretty Woman. There's that guy there, Richard Gere. He's called a corporate raider. Right. So those are the guys who typically come in and it's not a good story because they're called corporate raiders for a reason. But what at least I'm trying to highlight is that you don't have to give away that value entirely. There is someone who's willing to take that declining asset because they have other uses for them, or they believe they can return them. Private equity players as well are big type of that funders. Banks will fund you, but you are risky now because you'll find that typically your revenues are declining. Your products are not as attractive as they used to be. But you're no longer on an upward trajectory. You're no longer on an upward trajectory. You've stagnated perhaps. You've plateaued. You might even be declining. But you have some history. More importantly, you still have a most important asset in your balance sheet is cash. Right. But you are burning it. Remember when they say you are burning cash, that's exactly where you are. Because all of a sudden when they say you are destroying value, it means your income statement is coming negative every every year.
Right.
And who's funding your business? It means your balance sheet. You're eating into your reserves.
Right.
That's simply what it means. But by the way, there are funders again for that type of business.
011-883-0702. We're talking funding for your business. You've heard already that there are various stages at which the evolution of your business may be finding itself, and there are different funders for each stage. And I imagine, Andisa, that there's a language that must be spoken to solicit the funding at each and every stage, right?
Yeah.
There's a way by which I've got a couple of calls that I want you to take just now, but it sounds to me as though there is a language that must prevail in each stage.
Yeah.
In order for you, one, to identify the funders, speak to them effectively enough for you to unlock that funding.
Yeah.
And I imagine there's got to be a preparation then in that phase for the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. 011-883-0702. We're talking about funding for your business. At which stage is your business? Yeah. And who are you getting your funding from? It's interesting what you said about the banks, but let's quickly talk to Reginald in Pretoria. Good evening to you, Reginald.
Thank you very much, Aubrey, and thank you for taking my call.
Much appreciated, sir. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
I appreciate the inputs of Andisa.
Sure.
Having said that, I've always listened to many commentators and experts in terms of small businesses and so forth. But what very intrigues me in terms of the South African context and dynamics is that we have always been preaching around promoting small businesses, right from small micro enterprise, right from 1994, and even government have established right from the Nzika up until now, where we have found the establishment of the Department of Small Business Enterprise, which for me, I have not seen any tangible. But what we are seeing, with due respect to what Andisa is saying, it sounds very academic but not practical in terms of what, in particular, African black people who are South Africans. I'll give you many examples of many in the poultry industry, in the farming industry, right from the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and a little bit of Northwest, where I have seen very, very from rural people who are committed, who in their very nature, you can see that these people have got entrepreneurial spirit and talent. Yet we are not seeing any injection. Aubrey can speak, Andisa correctly from an academic point of view, balance sheets and so forth. Right from when the National Youth Development Agency was formulated. But what I'm trying to say is that in the context and the dynamics of South Africa, let me give an example in Limpopo, where we've got small-scale farmers with avocados and all the fruits that are grown within their own small plots. One, what is the role of government in injecting of capital? Capital in terms of whatever you call it, it's lacking. Let's not talk about a private sector. It's non-existent. Now, my question, I have listened to Andisa outlining the concept of balance sheet accountings and what. But the dynamics of South Africa is that, one, we must recognize our own in terms of their limitations and come up with financial products that are responsive to that. We can speak the language that we are speaking in terms of what the academia, the intelligentsia are saying. If we do not recognize that, we are going to fail the dynamics of our own people. I'm saying this because I will tell you, if we look at what is called foreign, business owners, it does not necessarily mean that they have got all these formalities that makes them to succeed in the end. I've got people that I know who we regard as foreigners who are legitimate here, but they do not necessarily have to go through all this that Andisa correctly from an academic point of view is saying. We must be responsive to our own individual.
Reginald, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you and say to you, that's why we're having this conversation. precisely because of the frustrations that you are raising right now. So let's park it there and get Andisa to respond. Can I just take two more calls while you take and I love that call because I think it speaks to the frustrations around what Reginald calls academic speak, that sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated by the comparisons between South African businesses and foreign-owned businesses. And ultimately, for me, the question is, how do we speak the language of the unlocking of funding? Because it can't continue to be a passive exercise. And I think many times we want it to be passive, unless we actually go out there and get it. So we'll have that conversation. But a great call, I think, from Reginald. Piri is in Alex. Hi, Piri.
Hi, good evening, Bobs and Mr. Ramavhunga there.
Yes, sir.
Look, I think as a business person, as long as you are able to sort of like show that you have some sort of value to add and you're able to contribute, I think you always, in one or the other, find funding from the sources that Andisa is really talking about. But I think I just wanted to touch on the the businesses perhaps that are not for profit, the NGOs and the like, and how those kind of businesses should seek funding in what Mr. Andisa has actually spoken about, and what kind of funding those kind of businesses can be able to attain, perhaps.
Sure. Piri, thanks very much. He's making the notes, right? So please stay tuned. Buang is in Orlando East Soweto. Hi, Buang.
Bra Aubrey, how are you?
Hey, Tarabra Buang. Very good, man. Are you well?
After a long time, my brother.
Indeed. Go ahead. What is on your mind?
Yes. I would like to ask your guest there, ne?
Yep.
How can he find us? Because right now we are bottle collectors.
Yeah, he's not a funder.
Yeah. How can
you be helped to find funding for your organization? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Because we are 4 to 5 of us.
Yeah.
We collect bottles, and then we stamp them. We take them somewhere. How can your guest help us? Bra Aubrey,
100%. Bra Buang, let me ask you this question. Do you make money?
A little, man.
All right. Buang,
so,
yeah. No,
on that note,
yeah.
If we want to grow big, how can he help us?
Indeed. Beautiful stuff. Buang in Orlando East. So many calls still coming through. Let's deal with those 3 questions. The frustration that many SMMEs, and I'll make reference to Buang's kind of business, feel around the fact that funding institutions, whether they be banks, whether they be venture capitalists, whatever, seem not to be focused in funding South African small businesses. And then let me just add this and say the whole intimidation around the lingo that is spoken that seems to remain highly inaccessible and academic sometimes for, let's say, Brabuang, for example, who might be saying, listen, I've got 5 guys. I recycle bottles. This top talk we are having here doesn't ring true to me, but I still need funding. So talk to that.
Yeah, I don't know whether to address the last caller. I missed the middle caller by the question, but maybe let me address the first caller, right? Remember, I started with this thing to say that your money is not in institutions, but it's in your market, right?
Yep.
I think the next question the caller needs to ask themselves is, why am I not accessing that money from the market? To access it is actually quite simple, right? Is to say, are you making enough sales and now can you make a profit? Because that's where the funding is.
Right.
Right. And I did come back to say that rightfully so. You asked me a question, when should you seek funding? And I say day one, because you need to bridge between the day you start and the day you access the market.
Yeah.
But the fundamental thing that I think the caller needs to at least appreciate is that without that market, there's really no appetite for anyone else to fund that venture. Which brings me to my second question, right?
Without what?
If there isn't that market,
yes,
that's where we need to access the funding. There's very little appetite for anyone to fund.
Do you know why I'm stopping you there? Because somebody's going to say, but the market is there, and usually at that moment we're talking about the potential.
Yeah.
We know that we can put seeds into the ground and stuff's going to come out that people might want to buy, but we haven't gotten into the process of taking what is coming out of the ground and selling it and watching the business process happen.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we speak from the position of, but fund the potential. And you're saying to me that the potential alone is not enough.
Well, it's not enough because it needs to be tested.
Right.
And hence that's why we went into the story of a growth, right? We said startup. So startup is when now you've seen at least the potential and you are now trying to harness it so that it moves beyond being just a potential.
Yep.
It needs to be some sort of
it's got to be a proof of concept.
Yeah, proof of concept.
Proof of concept, not just the fact that, hey, listen, I know how to fix cars.
Yeah. Come fund me.
Fund me. You're saying to me, there's got to be a business in process already for somebody to feel that they can risk their money
to put in there. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But, you're going into the detail around it. And the reason why we painted out the growth cycle of the business. But here's a fundamental philosophical assumption, at least I have. And this is what will debunk, because I can hear the first caller. By the way, it's a frustration I share with him.
Sure.
But I think I quickly got out of it. Maybe for his benefit. I'm not sure. I'm not an academic, by the way. I do study a lot, but I happen to have run a couple of business.
No, what you were saying is Robolela's courses.
Okay, we'll come back to that because it's my final point. I think the appreciation we have to remember with any capital. I mean, where do you think the capital comes from? I mean, do we ever sit back and ask for ourselves, if we're saying government or we're saying the private sector, where do you think the private sector gets the capital, or where do you think the government gets the capital? You'll quickly realize that none of these guys have money, by the way. They are also getting money from somewhere else. And that's the money they have to risk and give to you with the hope that they can return it to those people. The government gets money from its populace. And by the way, that money has other obligations that it needs to fund. So in fairness, they have, although I do agree that they should be aggressive in funding, but in fairness, they do not have a luxury of lazy capital. I don't know whether you understand by lazy capital. I get what
you're saying, yeah. So the capital that they distribute into into ventures out there has to have a certain
dividend
level of the promise of dividends. I usually ask myself
because it's about job creation, right? Yeah. It's about returning the dividend back to the taxpayer.
So there's got to be a return on investment.
Yeah, so it can't be a frivolous investment to say, let's try this out and see where it goes. So you'd excuse them, by the way, and I know they get too aggressive, and that's where I become a critic of them, because I think they can lax some of the rules they have. But what though we cannot argue with them is that they need to see a return, whether that return is in financial terms or it's in growth of businesses and increasing in the fiscals in terms of business tax. They have to see that return. Otherwise, it's wasted money. Why would we as tax people, because those taxes are you and I, allow someone else to do that on our behalf? I mean, if he himself is a taxpayer, why would he, if he now we were to say, from the rent that you earn, you give us, I don't know what's the tax rate now. I think it's sitting at 40%. And I'm saying I'm going to take 40 cents. And by the way, I can go out there from your 40 cents and do whatever I want and come back to you and say, hey, I have nothing to show. So I think as well as business people, we need to desist from that notion that government has got money to just frivolously waste. It has to lead to something. The private sector is even worse, right? Because the people who invest in the private sector are private individuals with their own private money.
Yeah.
They have no luxury in assisting someone live their dreams. They only have one thing in their mind, is how to increase their asset base or how to protect their asset base.
So is the gap there not a matter of all of these SMMEs, all of these potentially wonderful businesses that we are trying to assist? And I think I agree with the caller who says since 1994, we've been pushing the narrative that says we need to assist small businesses. They need to be able to speak the language.
The language
that says, this is my business, this is my offering, and this is how your investment is going to get a return.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
No, that's all I'm saying. And that's why we are trying to do, I think you tried to say, but this is exactly what we are trying to do, right?
Exactly.
And we said there's two forms of support that you'll get. Is financial support, which is obviously outside of our scope, but there's non-financial support, which for us is about entrepreneurship education. How do you sharpen the mind of an entrepreneur so that they're able to speak this lingo? I guess I'm getting to the point whereby I'm saying it's about time we stop feeling sorry for ourselves in a way. And stand up and do something, right? Because the same point I think that the caller is belaboring around excess of funding is the same point the guy who's sitting at the streets saying I'm not able to get a job has, by the way. Right, but that does not mean now we need to just open up factories so that one person can dig and the next person can close a hole. But that's not the way of getting rid of unemployment, right? The question is, are we creating value? Can we create value and absorb as many of our people as possible? So my challenge to the first is why don't you engage in this stuff, right? We spoke about strategy. Engage in strategy, because then we are going to be able to talk the lingo of return. I know we said balance sheet, and we've had these conversations, balance sheet, and we've had a full session on how to, from a layman's point of view, understand financial statements.
So what you're saying is that we can't have a passive relationship
we cannot.
With the funding process.
No.
We can't be potentially good business people. We can't potentially be a business that can add value and grow. It can't just be about potential. It's got to be an active process with the lingo spoken to the right people. And that is a matter of education, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we said there's a journey to this, and there's various people who are willing to listen to you at those various stages. At startup, I said it's family, friends, and fools. And by the way, banks are in there, but they will not secure the business or fund the business. They'll fund you as an individual, because you can access unsecured lending, you can access credit cards and so forth. Growth, they'll probably look at you, but they'll want to securitize the assets. At the mature stage, that's when they'll give you facilities for you to be able to dip into them and be able to give you access funding, particularly if you are a mature business.
Yeah, I've got so many calls
that's looking to grow.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, whether you call it academic, the reality is this is the language of business. By the way, everywhere else in the world, I think it's only in South Africa where we expect that language to be dimmed down, and unfortunately, it's not going to happen. And it's not happening, and it's
hence the frustration.
And hence the frustration.
So what we need to do through programs such as these is to bring the education so that we understand the concepts, how to speak the speak, how to unlock that, and understand that it's not a passive exercise.
It's not.
We've got to be active. We've got to be forward moving rather than waiting for some institutional recognition of my potential.
No, absolutely. And I'd be lying to people if I say this stuff is not hard, right?
Yeah.
Remember, we said excellence is a sport of the elite, right? You have to be there. It's always business. So is making money. It's not if making money was that easy, I think all of us will be making it. But it's about understanding what need you are serving to the client. Where are your clients?
I've got to stop you because we've run out of time. We've run out of time, and I've got lots and lots of calls still waiting to have this conversation. It is a critical conversation.
Yeah.
There's got to be a part 2 to this conversation.
Yeah.
But I want to remind people that that's why we've got this particular slot.
Yeah.
It is precisely to bring to our minds, bring it closer to our minds, and start to develop the language, this academic language that the funding world speaks. We need to start speaking that language in order to unlock those fundings and understand which phases our businesses are.
Which potential people to approach.
Absolutely.
Right?
And how to speak.
And what story you need to spin to them.
Absolutely. And that is precisely why this slot exists. So that we can sharpen our thinking and understanding of some of these concepts.
Yeah.
As we close, your final word.
Yeah. So, funding is there. There's loads of money. Unfortunately, money follows money. You'll only get money if you can prove that there is that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And there's various instruments available to entrepreneur across the life cycle. It's not like a be it and end all or black and white story. As I've said, banks actually can fund startups. It's a matter of who do you put as an applicant? Is it you or is it your business? And as you grow, likewise. But entrepreneurship education, how we sharpen our mind. For you to have access to funding is about you knowing who your market is and where ultimately you're going to find that pot of gold and who's going to fund it.
Andisa Ramavhunga, how do we get a hold of you?
So I am available on info@ntiyisoconsulting.co.za.
Andisa Ramavhunga, Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Thank you so much.